Hi, are you bored of drawing on the same old surfaces, the same paper, the same textures? Do you ever feel like you want to experiment? Well, today I'll show you a way that I create surfaces for the way I draw, and I'll show you how to do it. Well, I actually use sheets of pre-cut MDF, and I prepare them in a way that I suppose a painter would by creating primed layers. But the final layer that I use is suitable for graphite pencils and coloured pencils. Unlike paper, this surface is very tough. A big part of my work is not only about drawing and about painting layers. I like to take those layers away with tools such as scalpels, etching tools, anything that will take me back to that original white background and to create extra marks through that technique. And if I was to use paper to do that, I would just be ripping the paper away back to nothing. This surface is also amazing to be able to use your pencils in more of a painterly way with not only water but also with solvents such as Cestitite pencil blend, and it gives you the option to use many layers. Unlike paper, which gives you the option of a few layers before it starts to buckle and do horrible things, this surface just gives you endless layers. As the surface is rigid, you've got plenty of options for the final work, like using these UV varnishes. They work really well on that tougher surface rather than like paper, which will absorb it and buckle and create like an oily surface. This rigid surface with a primed layer doesn't do that. You can also use things like textured fixatives and final fixatives by the brush and pencil company, and they tend to work quite well on this type of surface. To create this surface, I use sheets of pre-cut MDF, normally about 3mm thick. You can normally get them on places such as Amazon, and they're normally cut into the A sizing. So this is A5, but you can get them A4, A3, many different sizes, and they're normally pretty reasonable. So the first thing we'll do is get some light sandpaper, and we'll sand down those edges. At this stage, those edges can be quite rough as they've only just come out of the wood workshop. It's just so to give it a nice smooth surface. Sometimes there can be some imperfections on the main flat surface of the board, so give those a sand too. When using MDF as a surface to do your artwork on, I do recommend using methylated spirits. Methylated spirits is a great cleaner and a great degreaser. And as the board has only just come out of a workshop, which is probably quite dirty, with lots of dirty fingerprints and particles and whatnot, it's great to give it a good clean with methylated spirits. So clean those edges, and especially clean the main flat surfaces that you're going to put your paint primer onto. It just creates a good surface and a good adhesion for those primers to then sit on top of. And it evaporates really quickly, so it doesn't take ages to dry or cause a mess. Right, we're now going to use some acrylic gloss medium to seal the MDF. The reasons why we need to seal MDF is firstly because despite its density, MDF is very porous. The moisture from ordinary primers and paints are soaked up into the MDF very quickly. This leaves a skin of primer or paint on the surface, which, because all moisture has been removed, does not adhere well to the surface. So it's always advisable to seal it in the way that we are doing it now, especially around those edges as we're doing here, because the edges where they've been cut create like an open door inside the MDF fibres. And so you need to seal that to create that stable surface for then subsequent prime layers to sit upon. The second reason is if you don't seal that MDF surface, because MDF is manufactured with a lot of chemicals, those chemicals can leach up through the MDF, through those primed layers and into your final artwork. So it's always best to seal that from actually happening. And it's also recommended to use a gloss type of medium rather than a matte or a satin. A gloss, once it's dried, leaves a toothier surface, which creates a better bond for subsequent layers to adhere to. So we're now actually getting to priming the board. You don't actually have to do this. If you want to retain the tone of the MDF colour, you could bypass this section. But as I want a white background, and for the way that I create these boards with a lot of scratching, I need to create this white primed surface. And I use just a general white acrylic primer. I'm not even using a particularly expensive one. It's just a bog standard Winsor & Newton Galleria white primer. Again, you can use different colours. You could use a black primer or a tinted primer, whatever you would choose. So with this first primed white layer, I'm using the old fat over lean technique. So I've mixed that first batch of primer with a quantity of water, so it's quite thin. I always make sure I do the edges. It's quite tricky to do when the surface is on the table. Okay, so let that dry. And what I normally do is, because I like a really smooth surface, and if you're drawing, I would assume most people like a smoothish surface, I sand between the coats. So if there are any imperfections or any bits that sometimes you get inside primers, especially the cheaper primers, it's best to give them a bit of a sand down. So I'll get on to mixing coat number 2, and this time, rather than mixing with water, I'm just using it straight from the pot of primer. Right, let it dry again. I normally leave it about 4 hours. And here I go and sand it again. You may think it's a bit over the top, sanding and sanding and sanding, but it does create a nice smooth surface at the end, I promise you. Right, this is the third and final coat. Again, you don't have to do as many coats as me. The only reason I do this many coats is because of all the scratching and taking back of the colour that I do. And if I didn't do that many coats, I'd be scratching back into the MDF and it just doesn't look as good. Right, and this is the final layer, and this is probably what everyone's been waiting for. I use pastel grounds for a drawing ground. Specifically, this golden pastel ground is amazing. It works so well with drawing media. It creates a really smooth surface, but there's enough tooth in it to be able to pick up the pigment from pencils. So what I do here to complete my drawing board, on top of those 3 layers of acrylic primer, I then add 2 layers of golden pastel ground. But remember to make sure between these 2 coats you do no sanding. You don't sand the golden pastel ground, and then just let them dry and you're ready to go. You can also use other manufacturer pastel grounds, like I've got another one there by Schminker. I've also got the golden drawing and silver point ground, but that seems to be a bit too smooth. It almost creates like a glossy type of paper effect, which is great for just general graphite drawing, but with coloured pencils, I don't find it works as well. The pastel ground, not only is it sort of grippy enough for pencils, it's also very absorbent. So you can use any of your water-soluble Aquarelle pencils, and like I've said before, painting with Zest-It pastel blend with your wax-based and oil-based pencils such as Faber-Castell Polychromos and Caran d'Ache Luminance. I do really love this surface. It gives you so many more options than just being stuck with paper. And because the actual surface is more object-like, rather than like just a piece of paper, you can feel like you're drawing on a canvas, or as if you're like a painter. I also like the fact that it retains the intensity of those colours of coloured pencils, but also behave like the best watercolour paper, which can take many layers of water. And it seems to be the ultimate surface for using things like Zest-It Pastel Blend and other solvents, because if you use those with paper, you get some really funny, oily, horrible effects. You just don't get that with this. And ultimately, what is great about this surface, you can create this into your own specification. Do you want it smoother? Do you want it rougher? Do you want it to be more absorbent? Whatever you want, you can tailor make this to your own work, and it's totally open-ended. Well, I do hope you found this video of some use. Please do like and subscribe, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, bye!